So good afternoon from Oxford, and good morning and good evening from many of you from different parts of the world. And I'm Jane Wang, working for the Oxford Executive MBA program. And with my deep great honor that I'm joined today by our four panelists. And they are coming from different parts of the world. And we have Riva and also Jessica coming from representing Africa. And then we have Lucas coming from EU, right? Lucas, you're based in EU at the moment, right?
Yeah,
And we
right.
also have Hugo at the moment based in Hong Kong. So thank you very much for your time today and sharing your information with our students. So just to start with, around 30% of the executive MBA students at Oxford is actually receiving some kind of funding from their employers and also their organizations. And also, this will help them with their tuition fee payment. So today you are going to hear the stories from our four wonderful student panelists who are either our students or alumni, and they are going to share how they went about to build their business case and also secure their funding with their employers. So just to start with, we're going to have some a short housekeeping point that if you have any questions for the audience, if you have any questions, please type your questions in our Q&A session. And later during the discussions, our panelists will cover some of those questions. And also let's start with our first slides, please. So um, we normally, when we go to the corporate sponsorship, we will build a business case. So this is the opportunity for you to share with your employer and organization how this program, Oxford Executive MBA program, will benefit you and also your organization. So to start with, we know this program will bring you some immediate impact. And as you know, that sometimes in every organization, they will have the issues, the challenges they're facing. So many of them will bring their real life stories, real life challenges and questions to the classroom. And then they have a brainstorming interaction and discussion with the faculty, with their classmates, peer students, and then they go away with some solutions. So this actually give you opportunity to apply what you learn from the classroom to your real life and your current role in your organization. And secondly, this program will also build you some new business opportunities. So, as we know, one of the really strong area of Oxford Executive MBA program is the diverse network. It's really students from very diverse background and a huge international network. Therefore, this is going to give you a lot of opportunities for you to meet with other senior leaders from many industries, from many parts of the world, and this will give you the opportunity to grow, to spot the growth area of the business, and also the opportunity to form and establish some partnerships with the future for the future business purpose for your organization. And then thirdly, as I mentioned earlier, this program, the students coming from many countries, many industries, and with a really on a senior level. Therefore, the global perspective and global network will give you opportunities to learn and to lean on the global cross-cultural experience and also help your company to go into the global markets. And of course, everybody is drawn by the Oxford Executive MBA program, by the Oxford network, because Oxford is actually this program because we are attracting the best of the best, some of the best business brains in the world. Therefore, you have the opportunity to access alumni, the faculty, and also the peer students from the business school as well as a wider university. And you will become the member of our Said Business School, and you also become a member of your cohort, and also the member of the wider college. Of course, when you become a college member, you will have the membership in the college and also the wider university. So the network is really extensive, and you have opportunity to access to this network. And the last but not the least, everybody knows the real strength of the sponsoring or funding the employee to do a executive MBA program is a great way to retain their talents. So for you to build a business case, you will really convince or negotiate with your company, with your organization, that while studying the executive MBA program at Oxford will bring you extra benefits. And next slide, please. So here we can see some traditional historical examples that we have and current examples. These are some examples of organizations and companies who are sponsoring their staff candidates to study our programs. So as you can see, there are some well-known brands names, and there are also some smaller companies, family companies sponsoring their students. And next slide, please. So now it's time for our four panelists today. So I'm really honored to have Jessica, Hugo, Riva, and Lucas to join us. And so first of all, let's start with them, and they can introduce a little bit of their background and what they are doing since the study and how they are performing so far. So is Jessica in a call today? I think Jessica has some issue with logging in. Maybe then we move to next one if Jessica joins us later. The next one will be Hugo. Is Hugo here? Hugo is actually dialing in from Hong Kong. No, Hugo. Okay, Hugo is let's skip Hugo for the time being. And then the next one, we know that we have Riva. Hello, Riva.
Hi, Jane.
How are you?
I'm good,
So,
good. Apologies, my camera just froze a bit, but I'll fix that.
no problem. If you can introduce a little bit of your background and
Yep.
how you've been doing so far.
Yes. So my name is Reba. I'm an investment director with a private equity fund based out of Casablanca, Morocco. I started my career as an engineer, shifted to finance many years ago, and have been in the financial services space now for the last 17 years.
Thank you. And then we also have Lucas here. Hello, Lucas.
Hi, hey everybody. So my name is Lucas. I'm from Brazil, but I've lived in 7 countries. And during my career, I joined the EMBA in January 25. So I'm in the same cohort as Riva. My career started in diplomacy, and then I moved to trading commodities. So something completely different. That's why I felt like I needed an MBA to fill in some gaps in my knowledge. And I now lead M&A and corporate development for a Middle Eastern startup in renewable energy. So basically in energy transition, specifically biofuels.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I think we can't see. Can we see? Oh, yeah, great. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So the following time is going to be a Q&A session. And as I mentioned earlier, we encourage the participants today to drop in your questions in our Q&A session. So we will try to cover some of those questions. So just some warm-up question, and let me ask Riva and Lucas to start with. So can you please share that in one sentence what corporate sponsorship has meant for your EMBA journey? Lucas, would you like to start first?
I would say it was what made it possible. I think it would have been much more difficult for me to take the decision to do the EMBA if it wasn't for their support.
Okay. So
So
it's
Yeah.
like a financial support, right?
exactly, yeah.
Brilliant. And the Riva?
Yeah, for me, it's meant that I had the ability to turn what was once maybe a personal stretch goal into something that I get to live without necessarily having the stress of costs, which was the biggest barrier for me into, making this dream that I had for the longest time a reality.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, and also say, what would you say in a single most compelling reason for a company, for your company particularly, to sponsor you to study the EMBA? What is the single most compelling reason for you?
Would you like to start, Riva?
For me, I think it was the business case in that they had identified that they would like me to be part of a senior management at some point. And as part of that, we had worked on a personal development goal, a personal development plan. And so the reason for the EMBA was really to fill the gaps such that I could become the leader that the company is looking for in terms of the succession planning that they had put in place.
Brilliant. Thank you.
In my case, it's also related to succession planning. So my boss basically had a vision that I would be the person to replace the CEO of Brazil, and he himself had occupied that position, and he saw in me the person who could, over a few years, take over that role. So that's what happened. I mean, that was the rationale, but it's completely not what happened.
Brilliant. And do you see the Executive MBA program actually help you with your career pursuit, or especially when you discuss with your employer, the sponsors, really? Do you think this actually help you? Did you convince them, demonstrate the benefits of the program?
Yeah, I think it did. I think a lot of the people that I had conversations with when I brought up the aspect of the MBA, they really leaned in and were like, okay, what does it look like? What do you get? And it did one, I think, solicit what I thought was, curiosity. And then second, once I did open a conversation that led with the EMBA, that conversation was sustained. And I believe that is because of the power of the Executive MBA. So follow-ups were done, and momentum quickly was anticipated.
Brilliant. And also, I would also encourage the participants of the webinar to drop in your questions in our Q&A session so we can provide some discussion, insights to the questions that you have. And when normally, when we try to, so Lucas and Riva, in your case, when you're trying to secure your corporate sponsorship, did you have to build a business case to discuss with your line manager? And how did you build your business case?
So, Riva, if you don't mind, I'll start. So I actually started about a year earlier by telling my boss during it was my first appraisal at the company, and I told him I don't want to discuss a raise, but I want to tell you that I have this ambition. I would like to do an executive MBA. And what do you think? And then basically he said, well, let's if things keep going as they're going, if everything keeps going well, then we can consider it. So by all means, apply. So I went on, and when it was time, I applied for Oxford and a plan B. I turned turns out I got the offer from Oxford, and then when I went to discuss the concrete offer with my boss, what I did was basically a negotiation one sheet with all the terms that I was imagining that he was all the arguments that I was imagining that he would come up with, saying why not and what I exactly wanted, which was of course full support. And that turned out to be what they gave. So they paid for me 100% of the EMBA, plus they gave me the time to do the EMBA, which is, I think, one of the most valuable things. And the only thing that was not covered in my case was the travel costs to Oxford and expenses here. But it was not as much as a business case, but just showing to him how this could contribute to my role.
Thank you. So, Riva?
Yeah, my journey also started during my performance development discussion. But what I went away with that during that discussion, what we did is we mapped out what my goals would be for the year and my objectives. And then we also started discussing sort of how, the site or how it would work in terms of the succession planning, what the timelines were, etc. And after a couple of days, because I had the clear objectives that, we had agreed on, what I did is I went to the Oxford EMBA program. There are some highlights of what the courses are, and I also had friends that had done the courses. And what I tried to do is from the material that I had and the conversations I'd had with peers, I tried to map out how each objective could be supported by one or two of the courses that we had. I have one of those bosses who's very direct, very one is two. And so I knew that it had to be quite detailed. And so I mapped out and named specific, these are the gaps that we've identified for me to get to, the C-suite that you have envisioned for me in 2 to 3 years. This is what the Ember courses look like. I remember I discussed things like strategic thinking. There was a lot of stuff on strategy. I think I've been in finance, but mostly on, deal execution and sort of doing deals, but have never had, strategic thinking. So I outlined, the strategy course, what that entails, and I did that for some of the courses. So these are the gaps. This is how the MBA closes it, and this is why it will benefit all of us.
Wonderful. Thank you
But
very much for your insights. Yeah, that's wonderful tips. And also, we've got a question from Waslis here, and he's asking, what was the level of sponsorship you received from your employer, and how difficult was to bring together business case and to secure this sponsorship?
So in my case, as I said, it was not exactly a business case, but what I do think it's important to add to the another layer to this conversation about corporate sponsorship is that it doesn't come for free, right? So in my case, for example, they gave 100% of sponsorship, but the way that they structured it was a loan that I would have to pay back unless I stayed for 3 years in the company after graduation. So if you consider the program takes 2 years, then they were basically telling me that I would have to stay in the company for 5 years. And that's a good signal that they are giving in terms of they want you to stay doing what you're doing. They like what you're doing. But on the other hand, it means that you're going to have perhaps more difficult salary negotiations in the next 5 years if they know that you are tied to them. Otherwise, you're going to have to pay them for the EMBA again. It might be a reason why you would stick to that company and that job for longer than you would have otherwise done. So I think that's just an important caveat. And in my case, what ended up happening was that there was a leadership transition, and the new CEO of the company actually didn't agree with the succession plan that the previous CEO had set out, and he offered me another position, and I said, well, very nice, but no, thank you. And I ended up leaving that company only after 2 months into the program. So they have paid for the program, and I actually left the company 2 months later without having to pay them back because of a legal uh, minor issue in my contract, which said that if they would offer me another position, I wouldn't have to pay them back. So I was actually very happy, and that allowed me to dedicate more time to the program and to my future career.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
No
And
worries.
yes. Riva, would you like to say something here as well?
Yeah, no, I think I would also emphasize just yeah, the sponsorship does come with conditions, and I think you need to be fully aware of them. And I had similar conditions to Lucas where it was sort of provided as a loan, an interest-free loan that I could pay back over a time period that would work for me. And if I left, I had to repay it back. So that's something that I think is quite common. But yeah, people need to be aware of the terms and conditions because we did then enter into a legally binding document to document that and how the repayments would work.
Brilliant. And also, we got another question here. Is that how do sponsoring organizations typically measure the value they receive from sponsoring an Oxford EMBA participant? So in your case, did your organization actually have to measure the value that you receive, that the company have received?
I think it's
That
a huge
person.
ideal for them. It's normally retention. So if they like the work that you're doing and they're keen on the idea that if you get extra tools and extra skills, you're going to be able to do it even better, and they want you to stay for another 5 years, let's say, because you're managing a business unit or a region which are important for the company, and they don't want to see anything transitioning in that period of time. I think that really helps. At least it was in my case. That's how they viewed it, more in terms of retention, than really building a business case, as in, I will bring you X amount of revenue or X amount of gross margin because I will do the Oxford MBA.
Brilliant. Yeah. Riva, so how's your company then?
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult to measure sort of the benefits, right? Because a lot of the benefits I would say are more on things that can't be measured, things like retention or having a suitable person to take over, having a steady pipeline that secures that, a strategy that's been agreed. We usually have a 5-6 year strategy. And so that's why we have, succession planning to make sure that if there is anything that happens, that we can see, the strategy period. And so it's quite difficult to measure that. But if there is a disruption in the team and that causes the strategy not to work out or to be delayed, that's really where that comes out. But at the point in time when that hasn't happened, I think the sort of measurements of whether this is good or bad it can be quite subjective. And I feel the team took a subjective view that the cost of not doing this would be greater than the cost of sponsoring me and making sure that I was equipped as a leader to do the things that they expected of me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Riva. And we're really glad that we have Hugo finally managed to join our webinar. So I know, Hugo, you're actually on your business trip to Beijing at the moment. So thank you for joining us from really far away place. Hugo, would you mind introducing a little bit of yourself and then so for us to get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm Hugo van Brekel. I'm managing director or general manager of a pharmaceutical company, currently since 1st of April in Hong Kong, Macau. But before that, I was head of commercial strategy and operations for a pharma company in Europe, encompassing basically every market in Europe except for EU5. So I think that's a small overview. I have 2 kids. And I think the EMBA for me has been really a time for reflection and very an important milestone, actually, to step back and learn and grow as a leader before going on to a next endeavor.
So Hugo, in your case, so did your company, your employer actually sponsor your study to some extent? And what kind of sponsorship of support opportunities they give you?
Yeah, so in the final stages, they actually decided to sponsor me all the way, and not to make any amendments or any clauses, etc., etc. Obviously, there's always a clause that you need to stay within the company, but I had basically everything from the travel, from the cost of the study, but also hotel expenses, etc., etc.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Hugo. So we are now actually in a session of answering some questions from the participants of the webinar. So the next question for the panels here is that what career development and executive coaching resources are available during and after the program?
So
Hugo,
we okay.
go. Lucas, please. Thank you,
I was
Lucas.
go- I was gonna say, Jane, that of course, we got the careers team and that supports us. So there's a team of 5 or 6 people. Some of them are coaches. They all have their networks, and it's really useful to talk to them. There's also the whole entrepreneurship. There's literally the entrepreneurship center inside business school. So if you're more into entrepreneurship and raising money and starting a company, then they are the people who are there to support you. And I've been in touch with both, and everybody's really keen to show you the path and connect you with someone that they know. But what's actually, I believe, far outweighs both of these things in the good way is the network that you get from your own cohort. So from your own cohort, from other cohorts, but especially in your cohort, there's going to be people from every region. There's going to be people from every industry. They, if you have an idea, you can pitch your idea to your team. That's what happened to me. And you get support from people in investment banking and venture capital on how to sell your deal. You get support from people in different regions on how that looks like for them. You get support from people from the industry itself, but then in different companies, maybe a much bigger, much smaller company than you have. So it's extremely uh, comforting, and it gives you, in my case, it gave me also the support to, after 2 months of program, say no to the company that I was at and starting raising capital for my own project. So it was, I would say, what really made the difference was the support that I got from people in the cohort saying, like, wow, this is an excellent idea. If you want any help, I can be, if you know, I can either help you or I can connect you with someone who can. So that's really amazing from the program.
Thank you, Lucas. And you just really highlight one of the strengths of our Executive MBA program. So, Riva, would you like to share your thoughts in this question? Is Riva? Riva, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry. Yes. No, I think, yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think Lucas has covered a lot of it. But we also did get career coaches, and I think we had 4 sessions with them in the beginning of the year. And I think what that helped me with was in the first sessions, we mapped out what my goals were. And so even after the coaching was done, I could then look back on that set of goals and see if I'm still on track. Because, yeah, there is obviously a lot going on. You're doing this course and doing live. So sometimes you do get off track. But I think that those sessions with the coach that the Ember team provided were quite helpful in laying out why am I doing this? What do I need to get from this? And how can I stay focused? Because also there's a lot that happens. I think, unlike Lucas, I came in, I wasn't even thinking about entrepreneurship. But during the course of this, I thought about it. And, that's something new that wasn't part of my goals list. And I had to update that and see how I could leverage the Entrepreneurship Center and what other resources could be there. But I do think generally there is a lot of support in terms of it might not be coaching per se, but just from the team in helping students achieve whatever goals they want to, and even when those goals change.
Yeah, Hugo, did you during your study, did you actually really use our career services, especially those one-to-one coaching services?
Not
Hugo?
not to the full extent, but not to the full extent. But I would say, basically building further on what already has been said before. It is a little bit like a playground, and there's a wealth of options actually that you can investigate and see what works for you. And I think that's also what I see so much in my cohort so far is that there are different personalities, different things that you need, different things that work. And I think there's an abundance on options actually to try things really and see what you need, where you want to grow. And I think for most people, the idea of what they needed coming into the program was not the final view on what they received in the end. So I think the good thing is that there's no limitation really, and you can try a lot of different things. And I think also the things that you pick up actually with company visits, with the network, with going out in Oxford, with going out in some of these trips actually abroad. There are a lot of opportunities actually to test ideas, to discuss things, to receive sort of on the spot coaching almost. So I think, it's more, open your eyes and try different things actually and see what sticks. Not limiting to one thing that you have within the program.
Thank you, Hugo. We actually have a question it's a very commonly asked question from the audience. So, what is the most critical explanations in detail? Which company has convinced, has, con I mean, let me see. What is the most critical explanations in detail which company has convinced? For example, did you convince your company with the information like networking, class? What is the most impressive explanation that you use for your company's boss? Like your line manager, for example.
Maybe I'll go first. I think this one is very specific, right? Depending on what the company's objectives are, and that's where I started as well. So looking at what is this company looking to achieve, and then starting from there. It's very important. I think I remember my first draft of sort of the motivation. It was all me. I need this, and I need to be a better leader, and I can do, I'm going to learn this and this and that. But what does that mean for their company? And the way that you can relate it to what does it mean for their company is to see how what you're learning in the EMBA translates to helping the company achieve the goals. So setting it back to their goals, I feel like that probably for me was the strongest way to motivate or convince the company.
Thank you, Riva. That's great. Hugo or Lucas, do you have anything to share?
I would say it depends very much on the company and sort of the assessment of the environment where you're going to pitch in. When we, Jane, when we had some discussion about my experience so far, I think the thing that I told you that my gut feeling was actually that the majority of weight or impact was actually made by stakeholder management. So it took me about 2-3 years informally to talk to different kind of people, sort of solidifying the idea, working my way up, and having conversation with different kind of high level stakeholders actually before I pitched. And I think the moment that I pitched, it didn't really matter anymore whether there was a decimal here or a decimal there, and it actually didn't really matter anymore whether I would decide actually that one of my entrepreneurial projects or one of my assignments would be on the company. They were already bought in. I think this is very much dependent on the context and the stakeholders, because I think my stakeholders, the people that I had to convince, they were also, they had been exposed to business schools. They had certain elements where they gave backing. And obviously, at some point, there's the formality of putting in the numbers and the cost, etc., etc. But that was not anymore the deciding point. And the honest reflection is also I had never a conversation afterwards actually about what did I do with this program, or what was the final cost actually of this program, because they fully trusted it and they already saw the benefit.
That's great.
So I would say
Lucas,
know your environment where
sorry.
you pitch, basically.
Yeah, brilliant. I think people are really using different factors of the program and then to build their own case depending on the company's needs. And Lucas, and how about you?
I don't have much to add, Jane. Just saying that in my case, I believe there was a lot of succession related worries, let's say, of my boss thinking that, okay, so I have this person. At some point, I want Lucas to replace this person, and we have sponsored an MBA for this person and for the person previous. So it was just the fact that I believe 75% of the convincing work was not done by me, was done at that time, was done by my work on the previous years. Let's say the person who you are is already, I believe, a big part of the decision in my case had already been made. So I didn't have to do let's say a great business case for that. It was just a matter of succession planning.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucas. It's actually, we've got the multiple people asking the similar questions here because as many of you already know, this program is actually we run in a modular format, which means every 4 to 6 weeks, students will fly into Oxford or, take a train to Oxford and spending a whole week here. So a few people here in the audience, they are asking the question regarding how you manage this program logistically. So can you actually share how this actually worked for you logistically? And also because some people have young family or family with young kids. So some people based in the US, some people based in Asia, some people based in South Africa, for example. So how did you manage the program during the study, logistically? So I think Riva, you actually when you studied the program, you were in South Africa, I understand, right?
Yeah. No, how did I manage? Did I manage? Honestly, I did my best. Let's be honest, I just did my best. I think it is a tasking sort of ask to juggle your life and to move meetings. So, for example, I think what we agreed with my boss is when I am traveling and I am in Oxford, I could. I should only attend mandatory meetings, and we agreed upfront what those were. And then for everything else, I can put my out of office. So I think that was helpful. And then I also tried to move. I did benefit a little bit from the time difference. There's a 2 hour time difference. I would have meetings quite early in the morning before class, and push them out like that. But also, honestly, navigating, the travel, the moving, I think, it's very specific. I did struggle a little bit in the beginning, but maybe towards June, July, yeah, just before the summer, I found that I had found a rhythm and I had gotten into it. So yeah. I know it's not advice because honestly speaking, I think this one is just very person specific. As I said, do your best and it'll work out.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. So, Hugo and Lucas, so in your case, did you find it challenging as well, or did you find it's actually quite easy to manage?
You start, Hugo.
I think, doing a program like this, there will always be a challenge, right? So let's be honest. But I think it's a little bit like everything, right? If you look up to the mountain looks very big. But I think if you start walking at some point and you sort of break it down in pieces, it is quite reasonable. I think for me, I had the same kind of agreement that I would only take basically the needed meetings during the week. And for me, it was a very conscious choice actually to take Oxford programs over other programs because I have two small children. I think from a family perspective, it basically means that this would feel for them like any other business trip during the week that I need to take. It's a little bit longer, but still I would be back during the weekends and I can sort of resume my regular life there. And I think also from a work-related perspective, it's very clear that which weeks you are there and which weeks you are not. So I wanted to really avoid actually putting stuff in my weekends, like every other weekend. So this felt, I think, for any program that I had to choose to combine it with a busy life, family life, and work life, this felt as the most governed way of actually doing this challenge. So yeah, some weeks are tough. Obviously, that's life. It will always happen, even if you don't do this program. But I think in the end, it's very manageable if you make the right agreements with the right people. Um, that's my reflection.
Yeah.
I don't know, Lucas, what your view is.
Yeah, I agree that the format makes it easy. So, of course, it's important to have a good agreement with the company. Like, I'm only going to join the essential meetings during that week. You can try during, like, right now, I'm working a lot with the Middle East. So, I try to work. So, I'm sitting inside business school right now. So, I'm not finished. I still have, I think, 5 modules to go. So you can try, but it's not ideal to think that you are gonna keep working while you're here. So it's a little bit overwhelming. There's a lot going on. There are lectures all the time. There are social activities planned by the Said Business School and by your college and by the other students, and you want to have the mind space to join all of them because that's extremely rewarding afterwards in terms of everything that you paid for. Basically, you get so much for free, let's say, from your colleagues and from these activities, which is not just going to the lecture. So that's very important in terms of when you make the consideration of doing the program, you have to know this is 1 week off. I'm gonna try to move as much as I can off my plate so that on that week I can concentrate because otherwise you will be yeah, a little bit um in a situation in which you're having to do everything at the same time and it's not going to work.
Yeah, I think there's actually we have a lot of people seeing, this is like a an interesting point that people have to travel remotely. But then I always pitch this program as it's a 2 year part-time program. So comparing 2 years, 2 years sometimes for the people who are already working in the professional world for many years, for 1 or 2 decades or even longer, then they find coming back to the classroom and doing the study it could be a challenge for many people. However, for 2 years of study comparing to a few decades ahead of your life in careers, in family, I think this is sometimes a lot of people see it, it's a commitment for 2 years, but then there are so much more to offer in the future for the next few decades. So it's people's personal choice. Is it 2 years versus maybe 20 or 30 years? I think in many
I
people's
would
decision.
I would add to that, Jane, to say that I think I remember the feeling of the first 2 or 3 modules when everything was new. It felt like such a privilege to be able to just sit down and listen to someone very experienced teach me something. And I think we forget about how, I mean, after so many years in our careers and juggling with our lives and having kids and everything else, how how important it is and how good it feels to just have the attention dedicated to one thing during a whole week. So it's actually okay, it takes a lot of dedication, especially afterwards when you have to write an assessment. But it's also, you can also see the positive side of things and think, wow, it's actually quite a privilege that I can be here today and just focus myself on this one thing.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful to see. It's actually in the classroom, many students, many people actually they've seen that they can leverage their assessment, their study to support their employers and also support their current existing roles during the study. And also, do you actually during your study have you come across any examples of strategic projects or any work you have done that you bring back to your organizations. And this can really justify the sponsorship investment that your company is actually, paying. So do you actually come across any projects, any business ideas, any examples that you can share with us? I think we give this one to Riva because Riva has to dash for another meeting. So Riva, would you like to start with for this question?
Yeah, if you could just repeat the question, sorry.
So it's like, in reality, in practice, we see many people actually leverage their assessment, the study, to support their companies, the organizations, and all their current jobs that they are doing. So in your case, have you ever seen any examples or cases that people bring what they have learned, what they have done in classroom back to their company so they can justify to their employers, like, this is the
Yeah, I
sponsorship that you
mean,
paid.
I did that, but I didn't do it necessarily to justify. I had already gotten the sponsorship, but part of what we learned in one of the courses is something that we're actually implementing right now in the company. And I had even spoken to other peers and other people. I understood that this would be important as sort of, a soft payment to show that, the things that I said when I said, this is going to make the company stronger, that I was standing true to that word. So I have seen that, and I think that is quite important.
Thank you. Thank you, Riva. Thank you for your time today. If you have to dash for another meeting, and please feel free. Hugo, would you like to share your ideas and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I did this program basically to I think a little bit so as Lucas introduced, sort of to stand still for a moment and actually to grow as a leader. So I think if I wanted to become a managing director or a general manager, right? So there's always the field of expertise that you already have. But if I look right now in terms of what I need to do, if we talk about governance or ethics or legal or looking at accounting, at sort of profit and loss, at income statements, et cetera, I didn't have a lot of exposure there. So I would say probably the biggest things are not the big tangible projects that you implement actually in a day-to-day basis, but specifically, right, if you're transitioning from a field of expertise, there's sort of the breadth and depth of general information, knowing, how to navigate things that you're gaining. So I think that has been for me the biggest knowledge asset actually, and driver. I would say also in terms of leadership style and where you are as a person. I've had people coming to me like, you're a different person than 2 years ago, and I'm thinking like I'm still the same. And I don't know what's really different, but seeing people sort of reacting differently and how you change, I think that also shows the impact. I think on a project level, yes, there are things, that I'd like to implement in terms of, I don't know, let's say scenario planning and different kind of tools and methods. But I would say that those are probably the biggest things are actually in the small things that change you as a person all across the board, which makes you a better leader in the end.
Mhm. That's wonderful. So, Lucas, would you like to
Yeah.
share?
So in terms of my payback to the company, I'm not going to speak about that because, as I already told, I left the company after 2 months. So I cannot really say, okay, I helped the company generate this revenue or this gross profit because I was in Oxford. But in terms of your own career, the payback is super clear. So like I said, I had the courage to dive into my own project and go raise capital for it because of the tools I learned here. I knew what type of investors I was going to look for. I knew how to structure the deal in a way that it was convincing for them. I knew what the benchmarks were in terms of how far can I go. So in in many ways, the payback was very, very fast in my case. So in 3, 4 months. But in terms of how it changes your it's very hard to measure because let's say we had a real estate module, and now that I'm selling my house, I'm already applying a few of the lessons from that module. Or on your day-to-day life, there are so many examples. Like Hugo said, it gives you perspective on a lot of different issues that normally you would be, let's say, um, too involved or too in the middle of a problem, dealing with that as a unique thing, whereas this gives you the tools and the perspective to zoom out and look around and think about your problem in much more in a much more um, in a much broader perspective and use the right tools to deal with that. So it's something that happens on a daily basis after you're here. If you pay attention to what you're learning, then I think you can really use that in your favor.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So actually, in your case, so how long did it take to secure sponsorship with your employer? And did you actually begin the EMBA application process in parallel or wait until the funding was confirmed? Both of you, Lucas and Hugo,
Yeah.
in both cases.
Would you like to go first, Hugo? I think you seem to have a more structured approach to this.
Um, I mean, for me, it was a very, very long. I would say I didn't have the pressure or the idea actually that I wanted to start a certain year. So I think I remember that I had conversation with Alejandra probably let's say 2 years before I wanted to start, and had a lot of conversation actually to prep it. And I really applied only at sort of at the last stage when the budget was secured. To be honest. And I think one of the things that I did not mention is one of the reasons why I said, okay, this is the time is one, I had the stakeholder sort of sign off, but the other thing is also my team was actually on a leadership level actually to step up. So it was sort of the perfect, it's like, the aligning stars, the perfect moment to have the approval, to have your team actually being able to step up and actually take that position, and then sort of signing off the budget and apply. So for me, it was 2, 3 years, but it didn't really matter whether it would be this year or next year. The timing, it was all about timing in the end, basically, for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
Lucas, you will be in a different story, right? Different picture in this area.
yeah, on a personal note, my wife and I we made plans of relocating. We are living in Belgium now, which is her home country, and we made a plan of okay, so I have this ambition of doing the EMBA. I will apply. The company might support me or might not, but I believe this is going to bring me great opportunities anyways. So let's agree that we are going to pay for whatever is not coming as a support from the company. If they support, great. So I applied for Oxford for my plan B. Ended up securing the offer from Oxford with a small scholarship as well, the Director's Award. And then I went to the company and they gave me that support and shape in the form of a loan. And as I explained the rest. So basically you apply, and in my case was the opposite as Hugo, right? So I decided, okay, I'm gonna do this anyways. If they support, fine. If they don't support, I'll pay for this. Um, because I wanted, and I was aligned with my wife on this, that we wanted to take a step and relocate after the EMBA. So that timeline worked. That timeline worked for us.
Yes, wonderful. So because of the timing, we have only the last question. And if you could go back and give your pre-EMBA self one piece of advice about sponsorship, what would it be?
It's not as important as it seems, which is against everything in this whole call. But I'm thinking that I'm saying this because if you are open to change in terms of jobs and geographies, and even going into entrepreneurship, or if you're a flexible person, this is going to pay off really quickly. That was my experience. So I went into having a corporate job in a company and then quitting and then starting to raise capital and then doing that for a whole year and then now actually joining a startup in the Middle East. So things can change really drastically when you're here if you are open to change. And if that's your position, then the payoff is really quick. If you are someone who is likely to stay in the same job in the same company and don't want to relocate, don't want any drastic changes to your life, then yes, your incremental improvement in terms of financially speaking is going to be much lower. So in this case, it might be better to secure your corporate sponsorship. But it's important to know where you are in the spectrum.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Lucas. That's very valuable advice. And Hugo,
I mean, it's almost difficult to add something. He phrased it so nicely. So I think maybe to build on the corporate side, I would say think very creative. Think very creative, right? Because there are many different means actually to sort of discuss how the company pays for it. And I don't know if you discussed it, Jane, before I went on the call, but you know, some of the things I was evaluating everything like can I get rid of my bonus on a gross level actually so that I don't have to pay the tax, right? So it's like, you know, you get a huge multiplier actually to get some kind of funding through the company or to give something to the company and get more back. So I think that there's a lot of things that you can do, and I would say, you know, take the time to think in scenarios basically for yourself. What kind of options do you have? What can you bring to the table? How could you structure it? Just to give yourself the confidence if you get into the discussion or the negotiation, right? That you feel quite okay if it goes left or if it goes right. And then in the end, I think, you know, listen to what Lucas said, right? Don't make it too big. I think in the end, these programs will pay off if you come with the mindset to invest in yourself. You know, you will get back every penny and more that you put in here. I think the flip side is also right. If you don't govern that, then basically, you know, your input is going to be your output. So if you don't pull the weight into this program yourself, then you're also not getting it from what it could be. So yeah, I would say good luck to the people here. A lot of options. Don't worry, be creative, and you'll find a good way to make it work.
yes, certainly. Thank you, Hugo, and thank you for Lucas for your sharing. And Hannah,
Yeah.
would you mind showing the last slide? I think as a team, we're going to share with the participants of the webinar today about there are some other funding opportunities that available for the program. So essentially, for you to get a corporate sponsorship is important that you're going to build a compelling business case to your either line manager or director or HR or CEO or president of your company. So these are some clear benefits that people always share, always discuss. So first of all is the opportunity for you to bring some questions, challenges, issues that you have in your real life and then you bring them to the classroom, and then you go away with some proposed solutions or ideas, lessons, or success or failures. So there are a lot of information that you can get out of the classroom from your peer students and from the faculty. And also, it's an opportunity for many people is a saving on a hefty consulting fee that you don't have to pay for the external consulting firm. So very conveniently they take advantage of their peer students and classmates. So, and also people will learn a lot of industry knowledge. They get the really updated information of the industry development. So sometimes they go away with the solutions as well. And of course, everybody knows that this will bring you the potential opportunity for collaboration and a partnership with the across industry or within your own industry. And the second big benefit for your company to sponsor your study is a global network that we provide that you are going to access when you become part of it. So as we mentioned earlier a few times, student diversity is one of our strengths. So you will have an opportunity to reach out and meet with many people from many countries and across many different industries. So this global business context, it will help you and your company to expand and to really grow within your company, within your industry, or even outside the industry if you want to expand to other industries. And of course, a lot of people see this, a lot of companies also see this as a great company branding and profile awareness raising opportunities because you are, in a way, representing your company in this classroom in one of the world-leading business schools, world-leading universities. And it's also an international opportunity for the company to expose. This company international exposure opportunities here. And next slide, please. And I know sometimes people are really, when they talk about the executive MBA program, people talk about the investment. And people will talk about the funding opportunities. So today we share a little bit insights and information about the corporate sponsorship. So this is on the corporate level. And many of our students actually also, in the meantime, get some sponsorship or the scholarship from their government or industries. So this is a government level and it's possible for many countries actually. And of course, on a personal level, there are some other ways. Earlier, our panelists mentioned that the pension sacrifice or cash sacrifice, salary sacrifice, that's a way to reduce the personal income tax, but also they got the tuition fee covered in the meantime. Also, study leave is something that our students also quite commonly use when they discuss with their employer. And last but not the least, some people will take the loans from the banks or from the different organizations. So this is on the personal level as well. So through the different means, people will have opportunity to cover their funding of the study. And as Hugo already said earlier, this is an investment. And if you see it as an investment, you will soon find out that this will pay back quite easily and conveniently later. And finally, let's look at the next slide, please, Hannah. Thank you. Finally, these are some typical means that our students are used to fund their EMBA study. So company sponsorship, corporate sponsorship is one of them. And then there are some private loans and other loans available out there in many countries, including the UK. And also, when you look outside the business school, in a wider university, we also have a university scholarships available. So you can find out this information on the website, on the university website. And in addition, our program also offers some scholarships for our students, for the executive MBA students. If you are our alumni, you studied one of our programs, for example, the executive diploma or open program or some kind of other programs, then you are entitled to have some kind of a tuition fee discount. So for you to find out what is applied to your case, please speak to the relevant recruitment managers or speak to anyone from our executive MBA team, and we are here to help you. So today, we really want to give a big thank you to our panelists today, Lucas, Hugo, Riva, and it's a shame that Jessica couldn't join us today, but hopefully we'll see her in the future. And also we thank you everyone for attending our webinar today from different parts of the world. either good afternoon or good evening or good morning. So we hope that in the future you have opportunity to come to join us and experience this program as Hugo, Lucas, and Riva has already done. And any questions, please contact our Executive MBA team. And we look forward to meeting all of you in Oxford. And Hugo and Lucas, we look forward to seeing you again back in Oxford when you come here next. So thank you, everyone, and have a very good afternoon, evening, and morning. Thank you.